Have you ever been to a church where wearing of scarf is not allowed? This was the church of Pastor Jide. Pastor Jide was a man of mystery, tall and imposing, with a voice that could both subtle and command. He had a way of making people hang on his every word. But there was one peculiar rule in his church that baffled everyone. No one, absolutely no one, was allowed to wear a scarf inside the church. It was a rule strictly enforced, and the penalty for breaking it was severe. The story begins on a Sunday morning as the churchgoers filed into the building for the service. Among them was Nkechi, a young woman with a curiosity that often got her into trouble. She had heard whispers about the strange rule and was determined to uncover the truth. Nkechi sat in the back row, her eyes scanning the congregation. She noticed the tension in the air, a nervous energy that seemed to ripple through the crowd whenever Pastor Jide was mentioned. She had heard tales of his sermons, of how people left the church feeling both enlightened and uneasy. But it was the scarf rule that intrigued her the most. "Why can't we wear scarves?" she whispered to her friend, Nneka, who sat beside her. Nneka glanced around nervously before replying in a low tone, "Nobody knows for sure. Some say it's to prevent distraction. Others believe it is something more sinistrous. But whatever the reason, no one dares to question it openly." Nkechi nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She decided then and there that she would find out the truth no matter the cost. After the service, Nkechi lingered behind, watching as Pastor Jide greeted the congregation. He seemed kind and approachable, but there was something in his eyes that made her shiver. As she turned to leave, she noticed an old woman sitting alone in a corner, muttering to herself. Curious, Nkechi approached her. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked gently. The old woman looked up, her eyes filled with fear. "Beware of the pastor," she whispered urgently. "He's not what he seems. The scarves, they hide the truth." Nkechi's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean, Mama?" But before the old woman could reply, a church usher appeared, ushering her away. "Come now, Mama, it's time for you to go home." Nkechi watched as the old woman was led away, her mind whirling with questions. What truth did the scarves hide? And why was the pastor so determined to keep it a secret? That night, Nkechi could not sleep. The old woman's words echoed in her mind, urging her to reveal the truth. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. The next Sunday, she decided to take a risk. Before the service, she wrapped a scarf around her head, covering her hair. She knew it was a bold move, but she hoped it would provoke a reaction. As she entered the church, she felt eyes on her, whispers following her every step. Pastor Jide's sermon was as powerful as ever, but Nkechi could feel his gaze on her throughout the service. When it ended, he called her to his office. Pastor Jide sat behind his desk, his eyes cold and calculating. "Why did you wear scarf today, Nkechi?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Nkechi took a deep breath. "I wanted to understand why it is forbidden." Pastor Jide leaned back, studying her. "There are rules in this church for a reason, Nkechi, rules that must be followed. But why this rule?" she pressed. "What harm can a scarf do?" For a moment he said nothing, his eyes boring into hers. Then he stood walking around the desk to stand in front of her. "You want to know the truth?" he asked softly. Nkechi nodded, her heart pounding. He smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Very well, come with me." Pastor Jide led Nkechi down a narrow staircase to the basement of the church. The air grew colder as they descended, and Nkechi felt a sense of dread settle over her. At the bottom of the stairs, he opened a heavy wooden door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room stood an altar covered with a black cloth. Around it were strange symbols and artifacts, unlike anything Nkechi had ever seen. "This is where the true power of the church lies," Pastor Jide said, his voice echoing in the small space. "The scarves, they interfere with the rituals we perform here." Nkechi stared at him in horror. "What kind of rituals?" He laughed softly. "Rituals that keep me in power, that ensure my control over the congregation. The scarves disrupt the energy, weaken the spells." Nkechi backed away. "You're using dark magic?" Pastor Jide nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Yes, and now that you know, you cannot leave." Nkechi rushed to unbolt the stairs, but Pastor Jide was quick. His hand clamped down on her shoulder, yanking her back into the dark room. She struggled, but his grip was too strong. "You think you can escape?" he sneered, dragging her towards the altar. "You have seen too much." Nkechi was very scared, searching for a way out. "Please let me go. I won't tell anyone," she pleaded, but her voice trembled. Pastor Jide laughed, a cold, heartless sound. "It's too late for that, Nkechi." He forced her to sit in a chair and tied her hands and feet with thick ropes. Nkechi's heart sank as she realized the severity of her situation. He began chanting in a language she didn't understand, his eyes glowing. "You see, Nkechi, the scarves are not just a distraction. They interfere with my connections to the spirit," he explained, his voice filled with dark excitement. "Without them, I can control anyone in the church." Nkechi struggled against the ropes, but it was no use. "You won't get away with this," she spat. Pastor Jide smiled. "I already have." Meanwhile, Nneka was growing worried. She hadn't seen Nkechi since the service ended, and it wasn't like her to disappear without a word. She decided to go back to the church and look for her friend. As she approached the building, she noticed the lights were still on. Quietly, she slipped inside, hoping to find Nkechi. She heard faint voices coming from the basement and crept towards the stairs. In the basement, Nkechi's eyes widened as Pastor Jide pulled out a small ornament box from under the altar. He opened it to reveal a collection of strange glowing crystals. "These crystals amplify my power," he explained, caressing them lovingly. "With them, I can bend anyone to my will." Just then, Nneka appeared at the top of the stairs. She saw Nkechi tied up. She gasped, but quickly covered her mouth to stay hidden. She watched as Pastor Jide continued his ritual. Nneka knew she had to act fast. She quietly slipped back upstairs and looked for anything that could help. She found a heavy candlestick and took it. Returning to the basement, she waited for the right moment. When Pastor Jide turned his back to adjust the crystals, she crept up behind him and struck him on the head with the candlestick. He crumpled to the floor unconscious. "Nkechi," she whispered urgently, rushing to untie her friend. Nkechi's hands were shaking as Nneka freed her. "We have to destroy those crystals," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. Nneka nodded. Together they gathered the crystals and placed them on the floor. Nkechi found a large stone and with all her strength smashed the crystal into tiny pieces. A cold wind blew through the basement. Nkechi and Nneka felt a strange sense of relief, as if a dark presence had been lifted. They didn't wait to see if Pastor Jide would wake up. They ran up the stairs and out of the church, not stopping until they were far away. Nkechi's heart was still pounding, but she felt a sense of triumph. "We did it," she said, panting. "We stopped him." Nneka nodded, but her face was serious. We have to tell others. People need to know what he was doing. Pastor Jide was arrested and the church was shut down. The congregation was shocked to learn the truth, and many struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Thank you for watching and listening. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories.